Hey friend, I'm so glad you're here. Today's story is a gentle, heartwarming tale meant for everyone, kids, teens, adults, or anyone just needing a soft place to land for a few moments. So grab a warm drink, maybe wrap up in your favorite blanket, and let's talk about something we've all experienced at least once: a terrible date. But don't worry, this isn't about embarrassment or regret. It's about laughter, friendship, and how sometimes even the most awkward moments can lead to something beautiful. Our story begins in a little town nestled between rolling hills and flowering woods. The town was called Willowmere, a peaceful place where every cottage had a garden, and every shop had a bell above the door that rang sweetly when customers walked in. People here said good morning to birds and good evening to the moon. It was the kind of place that felt like a deep breath. In the heart of town, beside a slow-moving creek, there was a cozy little cafe with white shutters and a blue awning. A tall magnolia tree stood out front, its branches like gentle arms stretching over the tables. The cafe smelled of cinnamon, vanilla, and warm milk, and it was run by a cheerful woman named June, who made the best lemon shortbread in the county. Our main character, Lila, lived just a short walk from that cafe. She was quiet but kind, with a soft voice, round glasses, and a love for old books and handwritten letters. Lila was well known in town for her flower stand, which sat near the edge of the Saturday market. People often stopped by just to hear her speak about the language of blossoms. She believed that every flower had something to say, and she arranged her bouquets like tiny poems. One day, her best friend Hazel, who was all freckles, loud laughter, and long skirts, decided it was time for Lila to go on a date. "You're too lovely to be spending every weekend with roses and daisies," Hazel said, handing Lila a folded piece of paper. "I met someone. His name's Peter. You're meeting him tomorrow at noon at the cafe." Lila nearly dropped her watering can. "Hazel!" But Hazel had already skipped away, giggling. The next day, the cafe was its usual charming self. Birds chirped in the branches overhead, the magnolia blossoms swayed gently, and the sun filtered down like soft butter through the leaves. Lila arrived in her favorite yellow cardigan and a blue ribbon in her hair. She sat at a small round table with a view of the creek and tried to calm the fluttering in her chest. Peter arrived a few minutes later. He was too polite. He wore a stiff tie, never took off his sunglasses, and spoke in a voice that sounded like it belonged to a lecture hall. He didn't ask Lila anything about herself. Instead, he talked non-stop about his collection of rare coins, his extensive diet, and how he preferred cats over dogs because dogs have no dignity. Lila smiled and nodded, trying her best to be kind, but her tea grew cold as the conversation marched on like a parade she hadn't joined. Then, just as she thought the worst had passed, Peter stood up mid-sentence, looked at his watch, and said, "I must go now. My hair appointment awaits." He tipped an imaginary hat and walked off briskly. Lila blinked at the empty chair, then slowly started to laugh. It was a small laugh at first, just a puff of air, but it grew until her shoulders shook. June came over with a fresh pot of tea. "Terrible date?" she asked kindly. "The worst," Lila giggled. And that, dear friend, was just the beginning. After the cafe incident, Hazel promised not to surprise Lila with any more dates. But Lila, to everyone's surprise especially, her own, found herself feeling curious. "I guess one bad date doesn't mean they're all doomed," she said one morning as she arranged bouquets of sunflowers, baby's breath, and violets at her flower stand. Hazel grinned like a cat in the sun. "Exactly. Every good story starts with a little chaos." So when a kind-hearted painter named Thomas asked Lila if she'd like to visit the community garden with him, she said yes. The garden sat just past the edge of Willowmere, where a footpath curved between birch trees and led to a patch of land full of vegetables, wildflowers, and fluttering bees. It was the kind of place where sun hats were always welcome, and no one ever spoke too loudly. Thomas was sweet taller than Lila, with gentle hands that smelled faintly of turpentine and pine. He wore suspenders and boots covered in splashes of color, and he always paused to point out beautiful little things like the way the sunlight hit a turnip leaf, or how the bees danced above the rosemary. Their walk through the garden started off wonderfully. They picked cherry tomatoes from the vine and fed bits of bread to ducks in the nearby pond. Lila started to relax. Thomas listened when she spoke. He asked about her flowers and seemed genuinely interested in everything she said. I think, Lila whispered to herself, this might actually be a good date. That's when the goat showed up. His name was Percy, and apparently, he belonged to one of the garden volunteers. Percy was small, with grey patches and comically short legs, but he had the soul of a mischief maker. The moment he spotted Lila's basket of tomatoes, he bolted like a fluffy cannonball straight toward her. In the chaos that followed, Percy knocked over a watering can, got tangled in Thomas's shoelaces, and managed to nibble the hem of Lila's skirt before being wrangled by a red-faced gardener named Elsie. Oh, he's a little rascal, Elsie puffed. Last week, he ate someone's straw hat. Lila stood in the middle of it, all dirt, on her knees, her tomatoes gone, and Thomas trying to untie his boots from a vine before, breaking into a laugh so loud it startled a bird from a fence post. Thomas looked at her, bewildered, then started laughing too. Well, he said, brushing a smudge of mud from his sleeve, that went better in my head. They ended the date sitting on a tree stump, sharing the last of the bread they'd brought, while Percy the goat bleated from his pen like he had been unfairly imprisoned. You know, Lila said, still chuckling, I think I prefer this kind of chaos over rare coin speeches and imaginary hats. Thomas nodded. I think you've just survived a perfect second terrible date. They smiled at each other, not with sparks or swoons, but with warmth, like two people who'd just seen something funny in the same cloud. And when Lila walked home that evening with her shoes muddy and her skirt nibbled, she felt oddly content. Sometimes, she thought, terrible dates make for wonderful memories. After the goat date, Lila decided she'd had quite enough excitement for a while. I'm done, she told Hazel one morning as they sat together beneath the magnolia tree outside the cafe. 2 strange, silly, and entirely unforgettable dates are enough for one lifetime. Hazel, sipping on a lavender lemonade, tilted her head. Maybe terrible dates are just puzzle pieces, she said thoughtfully. Sometimes you need a few wrong fits before you find the one that clicks. Lila smiled at her best friend. Then I'm taking a break from puzzles. She spent the next few weeks in the most delightful quiet. The weather turned softer as summer gave a long, lazy stretch toward fall. Her flower stand was filled with marigolds, sweet peas, and golden sunbursts. Children returned to school and came by with coins clutched in warm hands to buy tiny bouquets for their teachers. Lila began writing poetry again, often on the backs of tea receipts or tucked between petals in her arrangements. On especially sunny days, she'd bring her typewriter to the park and type under the shade of a willow tree. One afternoon, while Lila was deep in thought, a shadow fell across her notebook. She looked up and saw a man holding a cup of tea and a book titled The Art of Being Quiet. Excuse me, he said with a soft, almost musical voice. Is this bench taken? She shook her head and moved her basket to the side. He sat with a grateful nod. For a few minutes, they just listened to the wind rustle through the trees and the soft clinking of bicycles passing by. Then he said, That poem you wrote last week, the one about the sunflower reaching toward a friend in the rain, that was you, wasn't it? Lila blinked in surprise. How did you? I bought a bouquet from your stand. He smiled. There was a poem folded inside. I pinned it to my fridge. Lila flushed, unsure what to say. But he wasn't teasing her. His expression was sincere, almost shy. My name's Elias, he added. I'm the new piano teacher at the music school. I've walked past your flower cart every morning, but never had the courage to say hello until now. She laughed, a soft, blooming laugh. Well, hello. They sat together a long time after that, talking, sometimes quiet. No chaos, no runaway goats, no imaginary hats, just 2 people enjoying the company of someone gentle and kind. The next day, he brought her a small bouquet of forget-me-nots, and a note that simply said, Let's not call this a date. Let's just call it a beginning. And it was. Not loud or sudden, not sweeping or dramatic, but real. So, what did we learn, dear friend? Sometimes the worst dates lead to the best laughs. Sometimes, being covered in goat footprints makes for the most cherished memory. And sometimes, something good finds you just when you've stopped looking. Thank you for joining me in this gentle, joyful little story. If it brought a smile to your face or a flutter to your heart, I hope you'll like, subscribe, and come back soon for more cozy, comforting tales to brighten your day. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never be afraid of a terrible date.